Here Trump is taking credit for another close win, that of Kansas Secretary of State Chris Vucci in that state's gubernatorial primary. The polling there was done mostly by Republican polling firms, and ranged from Vucci losing by 2 points to his winning by 7 points. He won only after a protracted vote count. Trump, Donovan on Staten Island. he was down 10 and won by 24 points. Or thereabouts. That was a surprise, because he was going to, he was expected to lose. I endorsed him. He won by a lot. As you know, he was expected to lose against the previous congressman, right? He followed him. This is about right. A Siena College NY1 poll taken in early June, pre-Trump endorsement, had Rev. Daniel Donovan trailing by 10. He ended up beating former Representative Michael Grimm by more than 25 points. Then Trump turned his attention to the guy who released this ad, Representative Ron DeSantis, our Florida. Trump, I guess the one they talk about the most is Florida, because he was at 3, don't forget when I endorsed him, he was at 3. I put out 2 tweets. I put one out where I say he's really good, blah, 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 but that wasn't an endorsement. That was when he was at 3. A lot of people don't view that, they view the endorsement. Then a few months later, and he went from 3 to, so he was at 3, with little money, but a great guy and brilliant education. But he was at 3, and he went up 2 in the 20s with just not an endorsement. And then the endorsement, the one who lost, who was expected to be the governor of Florida for the last 4 years. They thought he had $21 million in the bank, and his poll numbers were into the 20s and 30s. And Ron hadn't really started much of the fundraising yet. And he was at 3. So then he went up from 3-2 in the 20s. And then he started fundraising, and did very well. And then he went from the 20s to win by 20 points. And that seems to be the one that people are most impressed with. So Trump claims that with one tweet he propelled DeSantis from 3% to 20% in the polls, and, with another, to victory. Trump has actually tweeted about DeSantis 10 times, starting in 2012, when he first ran. It's not clear which 2 tweets Trump is pointing to in his comments to the Daily Caller, but it is the case that DeSantis never polled lower than 16% in public polls. Trump first tweeted a formal endorsement on June 22. The first poll after that had DeSantis leading by 17 points. As Politico noted after his primary win, though, DeSantis had another important factor aiding his win: 121 appearances on Fox News and Fox Business from December until the primary late last month. DeSantis's campaign research made one thing clear: a Fox-first campaign was superior to a Florida-first effort, Mark Caputo wrote in Politico. For Republicans, all politics isn't local, it's on Fox News. That's the other factor underlying all of Trump's boasting. It's clear that he's popular with Republicans and that, in some cases, his endorsement has aided Republicans in their primary efforts. It's just not clear, first, how much credit Trump deserves, and, second, how much that effect carries over to the more important question for his party, general election battles. It is clear, though, that Trump would like to promote a very specific representation of his ability to decide electoral contests. It's clear, too, that his presentation of that ability is broadly overstated.